Right, hello, and time for a short update, connecting consciousness for all our CC members and for those who are awake and aware, but not members of CC, but like to listen to the updates. So I'll just talk about a little bit about the the supposed conversation between President Trump and President Putin. And it's really quite amazing that a number of people have done some videos saying that I promised that they were going to, hello dog, I promised that they were going to talk, and I got it wrong. They didn't talk, they didn't meet up, and I got it wrong, and it proves, how wrong I am. Well, to these people, you find a video or you find a message from me where I've actually said they were going to talk. I didn't even promote it on the website. I didn't put a link, I didn't put anything. And the reason I didn't was because I was not convinced it was going to happen. Did have a conversation with the continental CC coordinators and the general coordinators separately. And I said, look, I don't have the app for Truth Social. You're American guys. Can you have a look? There's a ton of fake Truth Social sites out there. Have a look and see what you can find. Well, that's exactly what I said. That's a massive jump from Simon said that Trump and Putin would talk. What I actually said was that I think it's part of the war, disinformation war, the art of war, because I know the deep state cabal will be absolutely terrified when they saw that advertised on Truth Social, that basically Putin was going to come out and say a lot of things, and it was all designed to make it very difficult for the deep state. It would be political suicide for Trump at this time to be seen talking to Putin. Putin has been painted as the devil, and even if Trump was to do a question and answer session with him, so from an independent perspective, it just wouldn't do him any good. It would be fraught with difficulties and dangers. And I knew that it wasn't going to happen at that point. And also the intel from trusted sources that I'd got was basically, we don't know anything about this. And that generally tells me that it's not going to happen or it's not truthful. So no, I didn't publicize it. I didn't push it. I didn't do one video promoting it. I didn't even put a written text message promoting it. So please, if you listen to people who are telling you that this and telling you that, what we should really be asking these people is why are they like that? Why are they wasting their time? Why aren't they doing something productive with their time? Why aren't they being much more of a patriot? Why do they delight in being rude or vindictive or nasty? Why don't they, do something patriotic? Why don't they do something to help people? Why don't they do something positive instead of attacking other patriots? And so we'd have to decide that actually these people aren't really what they say they are. So they'll just get that one clear, because I think that's important. Let's talk now about the war in Ukraine. The intel that I'd received from trusted sources made it quite clear that Putin was not after the Ukraine. It wasn't a war to take over all of Ukraine. What Trump wanted to do, what Trump wanted to do was to ensure that he wasn't associated with any of that. And so when he was out of office, he didn't have a conversation with Putin. So Trump isn't involved in any of this. Trump didn't say to Putin, go and do it. Putin for years has wanted to do this. And deliberately, Putin did not share that direct intel with a number of people because it would have embarrassed them. So Putin did what he was always going to do, which was create a buffer between what is Russia proper and what is Ukraine proper. In other words, I wouldn't be surprised if everything east of the Dnipro River became Russia and everything west of the Dnipro River was Ukraine. Clearly, what Putin wanted to do was to create a no man's land, this buffer state, not dissimilar to the Second World War, when Russia invaded that part of Poland to create a buffer state between what was then the recently invaded German army and what would then become the border with Russia. So Russia, as it stands at the moment, is looking to create a safe haven, a time space, so that if there was an issue with NATO, there would be this extra space. In terms of Mariupol, it's been given all of this coverage, but what the mainstream media are not telling, and of course they're not telling it, is that the sons, and I mean son as in S-O-N, not S-U-N, and you'll see why I'm calling that in a minute, that the sons of the Black Sun, that's the Azov Brigade, or more correctly, the Azov Battalion, who are Fourth Reich, set up by the fascists within the deep state, the cabal, and named after the sea area that Mariupol is close to as a maritime port, Azov. The Azov Battalion or Brigade was tasked to fight to the death in the eastern part of Mariupol. In the north part of Mariupol were Ukrainian Marines, and in the west part of Mariupol city were a armored brigade or semi-armored brigade to defend that. And so, whilst all eyes were basically on, Kiev and the north or the top east of the country, the real action was taking part down towards the Crimea. And reality was that Putin decided that he was going to completely surround Mariupol, so that these sons of the sun, the black sun, the dark sun, the sun that's a binary dark star to our sun, they couldn't escape. So if I said to you that Mariupol is a modern day Stalingrad, there would be quite a lot of interesting connections there. What's happening is that the Russians found that the Azov Brigade, because many of them are mind controlled, were fighting to the death. Not just to the death, they were fighting fanatically, just as you would expect fascists to fight. And even in the mainstream news, mainstream refers to the Azov Brigade as a far-right unit. So even in the mainstream, they'll say it's a far-right unit. We'll just call it a fascist Dark Sun Brigade unit. And what Putin did was he had a lot of respect for the Chechen rebels. Many years ago, were in a separatist war with Russia. And since that time, many of the Chechens have enlisted with the Russian army. Chechens are excellent street fighters. So I think he brought about 5,000 or 6,000 of these Chechen troops, and he pitted them directly against the Azov Brigade. So what you've got now is the Fourth Reich fascists in Mariupol fighting the Chechens, who are Russians, but have had that experience of street fighting. Remember in 1945, when the Russian army, 1 million strong, broke into Berlin, they'd had years and years of street fighting. I talked about Stalingrad, there was Kharkov and many other cities. And so the majority of Russian troops in 1945 had a very good understanding and grasp of what it's like to fight in the streets, whereas the Russian army of today won't have that experience at all. And also the Russian army is not mind controlled, to die where you stand. Self-preservation with people, even in well-trained soldiers, tends to be quite strong. So the Russian troops, the Chechen element, have broken through the eastern perimeter of the Azov Brigade. And as I'm talking to you now, they're actually fighting in the very center. News is always hours behind. I wouldn't be surprised if the mayor of that city has been captured, or the central government buildings are under attack as we speak. The West Russians have made very good progress against the armored brigade. This was a regular Ukrainian military brigade, again, not particularly well trained for fighting in the streets. And as you would expect, they've been quite heavily pushed back. The Ukrainian Marines in the north have done better, but again, the Russian troops are not seeking to come in from the north so much as to contain a cordon around. They don't want the sons of the Black Sun to escape and go to another city and fight on. So this really is a fight to the death. And the reason Mariupol is the center of this fighting is simply because the Fourth Reich had all of its command and control in that city. So that I wanted to try to explain what's going on there. It's very difficult to talk about any war, emotive subjects. It's very, very tricky. Those of us who have more open minds are able to look at mainstream news and think about that quite critically. Those who don't understand a penny of what is going on will just automatically believe. And I've got to choose my words carefully because, it is a very difficult and emotive subject. So let us suppose somebody has a biological laboratory. Most countries do. I mean, in Great Britain, it's important down. But in most countries, the government is not necessarily going to take that and release it onto an unsuspecting population. But there are some countries or organizations that would and have done so. So imagine that there is this mythical country where there are a number of these biological establishments. Would you stick it on top of a hill with a big signpost saying, please bomb me? Or would you do what all cowards do and have human shields and hide it in civilian areas? Might you not put it in the underground part of a hospital, knowing full well there were innocent patients and staff, and you would hope on count that nobody's going to take you out because they wouldn't do so because of the collateral damage, the death of those innocent people? Or might you put it into a school or a kindergarten and in big Russian letters write the word children, because you would be safe perhaps in the knowledge that no one's going to bomb a kindergarten, therefore your biological laboratory is going to be quite safe. The deep state made a mistake with Chernobyl. Again, Russian spy satellites picked up a heat signature under Chernobyl, and those pictures were sent off, and it was confirmed as best as can be that somebody was spinning uranium under Chernobyl. Very clever, because the ground at Chernobyl was radioactive, and so gave off a radioactive signature. But the spy satellites are very, very complicated, and they're very, very technical, and they could discern that the heat being given off was greater than you would expect from a residual amount left in the earth. Now, the second point about hiding a nuclear production facility in Chernobyl was that you can't take it out with a cruise missile. Well, you can, but you would spread radioactivity right across the globe. So the deep state were quite confident that if they had that facility there, it would be quite safe. That is why, even in the mainstream news, it was reported that Russia landed paratroopers, special operations there. And because Trump, yeah, get it right, Trump had actually said a number of years ago to Putin, if you ever take any operations, it must purely be from Russia's perspective, and you mustn't do anything that would contaminate or affect the world. So Putin was really under orders, shall we say, from the world, that whatever he did, it had to be in-house, it had to be cleaned up in-house, it couldn't be broadcast, and you couldn't start spreading radioactivity across borders, because borders don't know borders. A radioactive dust don't know the difference between Ukraine or Poland. And that is why special troops, some Spetsnaz were used, airborne troops, and others that were dropped. I would say that the Delta Force and the force within the Delta Force are probably the finest troops available. Obviously, the United States Marines are very good. The British have the SAS and the Special Boat Squadron, but the Russians also have pretty good, small numbers. They don't have a lot, but they have some pretty good troops, and they captured that facility under Chernobyl intact. And so I think what we can clearly say is that a leader wouldn't want biological laboratories or the potential for nuclear weapons, dirty bombs. I don't think the Ukraine cabal had the ability to make a traditional nuclear bomb, but they had the capability to make a dirty bomb. I don't think anybody, Putin or otherwise, would tolerate something like that. From Putin's perspective, he had the military capability to project his arm, whereas lots of countries don't have that, or don't feel that they've got the political clout to do it. And Putin doesn't actually care what people think about him. This is why the West doesn't understand. The West has piled a load of sanctions on Russia, which will backfire terribly and hurt predominantly Europe, considerably the United States, and quite slightly Britain. I'm in no doubt that Russia, China, probably India, possibly even Poland, and a couple of other countries have moved to a asset-backed currency. Putin's been very clever, and he said, if you want to buy gas or petroleum from me, you must buy it in rubles, which means I'm not taking the petrodollar. I'm not taking the US dollar. That's all right, except if the ruble is gold-backed and you go with paper money that's worthless, you suddenly find that you've got to pay maybe 100 of yours for one of theirs. That's probably too high, maybe 12 or 15. But the reality is that it becomes too expensive for a country to import gas or petroleum from Russia, which means a huge reduction. Europe relies on 40% from Russia. 40% of its energy is coming from Russia. So that's a huge, 5% from Britain or 6%. It doesn't make a difference to Britain. So we have a situation, I think, where Russia is moving to this new system, this asset-backed currency, and China has made it very clear that it's not going to sanction Russia. China's also moved to an asset-backed currency, and China has said that it will supply weapons to Russia if Russia asks for it. That's a bit of play for the mainstream media. The reality is that not many Russians speak Chinese, and so Chinese weapons aren't that helpful. But there are a number of drones. The Chinese have got some very good drones, and they could supply those to Russia if Russia wanted. But this is more of a political position, basically China saying to America, don't tell us what to do. We're not going to sanction Russia. And China's actually come out publicly in the mainstream and said words to the effect that, look, we understand what Putin is doing. It's probably best that the West keeps out of it. And of course, the two hypersonic missiles that we know of that were fired were done just as a message to NATO. NATO does not have hypersonic weapons. America has, but America is not really part of NATO. It funds it, but isn't really part of it. Not now. China has them. There are not many countries in the world that have a hypersonic missile. And the firing of those was literally to show the West that NATO better keep out because you've got no defense against this. So we've got a situation, I think, where it's nearly over in Ukraine. It may not appear that way, but I think it's not far off now. A position has to be achieved. There has to be a sit around the table. The cabal will be out of Ukraine. NATO won't want Ukraine anymore because there's nothing left for NATO to play around with. The cabal won't dare go back into Ukraine because Russia will just take them out again. The big question is other countries. Some of the cabal are looking to relocate to Croatia. Poland is not on the cards, it's too close. So Croatia's government has got to be very careful because they are having approaches now from the cabal to set up in there. It's a European country, joined relatively recently. So I wanted to talk more because we have a situation where the mainstream media willfully are not reporting necessarily on the ground. And whilst I'm sure that the Ukrainian army are fighting, I'm absolutely sure they are, most of them are who are on the streets crowd controlling are private security firms or mercenaries. One reporter talked about these blacked out SUVs, and every time he went somewhere, some of these guys would stop him and ask for his papers and what was he doing. But they didn't appear to be regular military units, and they had the black sun symbol on them, and they're the ones that are really in the main cities at the moment. And so yeah, the Fourth Reich, as many of us know, kicking on well in many countries, and that's what's occurring there. So that's an important point, I think, just to try to understand what could happen next. Well, China and Taiwan, very much so. Maybe as soon as a peace deal of some sort is arranged, we might see China and Taiwan going down the same road. That is a possibility. When will all of this end? Well, I suppose when the evil has been largely cleansed or removed. That's the one part. Second part is when the people generally have some understanding of what's taken place. I am a little bit tired of commentator after commentator telling us all that so many people have woken up, so many people now more awake. If this was all really true, well, we'd all be awake now, wouldn't we? And there wouldn't be any more of this nonsense. The reality is that people are waking up, but the number of people who are determined to resist the truth for whatever reason is enormous. It's huge. It's got to be 75%. It's got to be. It's got to be 3/4 of the entire Western world, English-speaking world, whatever you want, have got to be willfully not interested, won't find the time for it, don't want to know, don't believe. And as much as we like to talk about all these people that are waking up, it's not the majority. And so how if you have a plan, how do you get to that? How do you encourage people? How do you push it into their face so that they can't keep turning their face away from it? And they've got to look at it. You can't make them believe, but what you can do is make them look. I think that's the point. And so, we've talked about, and I have for many years, over 10 years now, I had a catchphrase, didn't I, which was, don't wait for the 7th Cavalry to come and save you. We are the 7th Cavalry. We have to do it. And I know that many people in the DoD, the Department of Defense, are heartily sick of the ordinary people expecting them to come and do it all for them. And their view, rightly or wrongly, their view is, look, you are the civilians, you elected these governments, you gave this power away years and years and years, and we are military, we're supposed to be separate from all this. So listen, you guys have got to, A, understand what you've done by allowing the situation to occur. By the way, I'm not saying this is right and wrong, but I'm just saying this is the viewpoint. B, you've got to do something about it. Don't expect us overtly to help you. But what has happened is there's been covert operations. That in one of my favorite old songs, which became a hit in Britain in the 1970s, was Laurel and Hardy singing in the deep blue mountains of Virginia, the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, on the trail of the Lonesome Pine. Well, they were certainly on the trail of the emergency broadcast system, and although it's technically a civilian stroke agency operation, it was taken over by the CIA in the late 50s. And it wasn't so much Delta Force capturing it so that they could send out emergency broadcast. It was more about Delta Force capturing it so that the deep state couldn't send out messages themselves. Absolutely no point if you're trying to bring truth to the public and the deep state then can send out these counter messages. When Delta Force went into Frankfurt and captured that woman, Gina, head of the CIA, Delta Force suffered five fatalities. It's a very heavy number to lose, and that was in gun battles with CIA agents within the corridors of the Frankfurt CIA operation to get the servers. But in the facility in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it wasn't quite the same setup, and it was a more open. If anyone's been ever to a deep underground military base or a complex, you know that it's not like a modern office block. It's laid out very differently. And so I understand between 11 and 13, 14 of the mercenaries or whoever were guarding the facility were actually wounded or shot dead by Delta Force. Delta Force, I understand, took 2 or 3 wounded, but they weren't too badly, and the facility was captured. So all this is covert. And of course, for people to say, give me the proof, give me the proof. Well, you're not going to get the proof, are you? No one's going to come up and say, yes, we killed these people, we killed the CIA, we did. It's never going to happen. But what we should have the proof is how things are developing, how things are going through. And the reality is now that the good guys could start to do work with the general public without fear of the cabal sending a message on your cell phone, your mobile phone, or television. So that was very important. And Delta Force are really, and other groups, I don't want to leave other people out, but other groups are doing quite strong work as well. So there's been quite a sea change from the military side, exerting itself quietly, privately. But to get back to the theme of the talk here, if petroleum prices start to skyrocket, someone was telling me they were paying $6 a gallon. You ain't seen nothing yet. If there are food riots, the stores in Washington, D.C., and many of them are now empty. European countries now are running out of food. It's nothing to do with COVID. This is to do with all of the world issues now occurring. And what we will see, I think, is people being pushed to the limit. People not being able to afford to heat their homes, not being able to put petroleum in their cars, not being able to pay for this and pay for that, and becoming desperate. And there's nothing better than imprinting into somebody's mind the world they live in than a financial hardship, or a hardship in terms of we've taken it for granted. We could go to the convenience store and we could buy whatever we wanted if we could afford it, but it was always there. And to be faced with a situation where that doesn't happen, that 75% I've talked about of the human race, hopefully will say, not just in America, we're turning against Joe Biden, because that's not what it's about. But we're turning against the system that we've grown up in all our lives. Some people call it the Matrix, but let's just call it, from the unawake and unaware, the establishment, the system, the way of their life. If these people can turn against, as we all have, we've all turned our backs on this fake world that we live in. But if this 3/4 of the population can suddenly say, I reject this reality, then it's a bit like Alice in Wonderland breaking through and coming away from Wonderland and returning back to the real world. So a Neo breaking out of the dream state in the Matrix. And if the 3/4 can actually say, we're not just going to blame an individual like Biden or anyone else, but we're going to blame the world that we live in, the next natural reaction is, how do we change that world? And that's what I think what the good guys are looking for. They're looking for the vast majority of people to say, I reject the world that we have, and I want to be part of a world that's different, that has different values. And I think that's all the white hats actually want to hear from the majority of people. Now we have a situation where we call it the quantum financial system is very, very successfully rolling out now quietly. And many people have sent in to me and others, and I believe over the weekend, there were quite a lot of people putting stuff out showing that, the websites taking their payments for their college or their loans on their car had all gone down. And this is part of the debt forgiveness. It's part of them having to recalibrate how an organization that survives on other people's debt, how are they going to manage in a world where, this sort of debt isn't tolerated so easily, it isn't smiled on, as at the moment, debt and credit is absolutely the way of our lives. It's the way we are. I remember a very funny film, which is not too old, where the guy goes into a hotel in America. He's British, and he is old-fashioned, and he expects a key to his hotel room that is an old-fashioned metal key, and of course he's given a plastic card key and doesn't understand it, and he says, "No wonder America's in so much debt. I've only just arrived here, and you've given me a credit card." Well, the truth is that the Western world has destroyed itself economically, but as long as the cabal controlled all the institutions, that lie was kept alive, and it didn't matter. And it could have gone on. People keep saying it's going to collapse. It could have gone on. It's about confidence. If the cabal was able to maintain confidence, then the financial system can be as rotten as you like a Swiss cheese with a million holes in it. But as long as people believe in it, it will still function. The only time it doesn't function is when someone comes along, as is happening now, and says, let's have an asset-backed currency, gold, silver, platinum, whatever you want, and we refuse to use the dollar to buy oil. Now that's the changing point. People talk about a massive, huge Dow Jones, FTSE crash, all of the stock markets crashing. That actually is very likely, but unfortunately hurts not just the cabal, it hurts everybody. And if you look, there's been a soft crash over the last few months. I think it was on 37,000 down to about 34,000, because it's been done gradually, and because the deep state have done everything they can to pretend that the stocks are fine and it's just a small blip. It hasn't had that huge impact that most people would expect. So we have a perception of what we think should happen, but when we look, it's actually been happening, but in a more subtle or gentle way. And I know that many people were upset when I said, look, I'm not convinced the full truth will come out. And I know many people may not like to hear that, but perhaps in their hearts they know that's probably true. And I've said that some people believe that Joe Biden is an actor. Some people believe that Joe Biden is CGI. Some people believe that he really is who he says he is. But why would anybody come out and say, "Oh yeah, we put an actor in there. We put an actor in there so that you could all pay $15 a gallon for your gas, and you wouldn't be able to buy any food, and we did all this and we did all that." Nobody is going to own up that they did that. Now, there's another possibility as well, an interesting book. Come on, let's get the dog up. Why would you do that if you were going to have a big dissection of your election, your election fraud? Why would you do it if you were going to indict Joe Biden? So those of you who are purists, and most of us are, you're going to have to perhaps come to terms with the fact that much of what we know will never ever come out, because it doesn't actually play to the white hat's advantage. For many, many patriots who are not fully awake and aware, the message is sometimes given out, which is rather simplified, which is Trump good, Biden bad, end of story. And you talk about deep underground bases and the children. There's a whole core of strong patriots who refuse to believe that. They don't take it, but they do know that the election was stolen. And so it's not surprising that in America the patriots are campaigning again and again and again on the price of gas, on food, on the stolen election, but you won't hear talk about anything other than that. And the reality is, I think, that truth will come out, but not for a while. In other words, if you're going to destabilize the world and you've got to re-educate 3/4 of the English-speaking population, there's only so much they can take in a short period of time. So we are seeing big changes, and I'm very upbeat. I'm actually more upbeat now than I was 6 weeks ago. I am actually quite clear that we've turned a corner, both in terms of the QFS, in terms of what I'm aware of is occurring for the better, in terms of the collapse of the deep state militarily, and its ability to project itself, and still can do stuff, but they really are struggling, and that's a good sign. So I just wanted to come and just touch base with everyone. I don't do these things regularly. I don't sit here and churn it out. It's not my lifestyle. It's not what I want to do. I'd much rather come and talk to you when I have something I hope worthwhile to say. And we are in a time now of choosing. Perhaps we've always been in a time of choosing, but we're in a time of choosing now. And those people who are meant to see the truth will, and those that are not meant to see the truth, well, they just won't. And we should always ask ourselves, there are people that spend their time causing difficulty, being nasty about others, and that's the way they live. Well, what a terrible life to have. What a terrible life, because the way you project yourself when you do a podcast or a video is a reflection of who you are. It has to be. It has to be. You know, unless you're an actor and you do what have you. But for most people, the way they come across, the way they project themselves is what's really going on inside them. And if they've got terrible turmoil inside them, well, that comes out. And I've never, ever seen the advantage of screaming and shouting at the audience, or getting hyper excited and talking so fast you can't make out the words, or talking about nonsense, or and there's so many people out there who perhaps don't have the full picture. Not saying that I do have the full picture, but they don't even have part of the picture, and they just talk about absolute nonsense. And the good bits they've got are so hidden amongst all the rest of it that it's very hard. And what we need now is calmness. There's enough craziness and madness out there for a lifetime. We all know that's true. And so, let's not join that madness. Let's not, it's like getting off a metro train and charging down through the corridor and swept away by the group of people. That's not what we need. Humanity is better than that. What it means to be truly human is to be able to connect to God, source, the planet, whatever you want, but to have that extra connection that lifts us out of this matrix that controls us. And yes, it does make it different from somebody who doesn't see what we see, doesn't want to see it through fear, but absolutely blankly refuses to countenance anything other than the news. The number of people that say, I believe what the government tell me, is shocking. It's shocking that the supposedly the superior species on the planet, is more crazy than some of the less species. Maybe the dolphins actually are better than we are. But the reality is that the vast majority of people have given away their sovereignty. They've given away their power to somebody they don't even know, who they trust because of their position. And they do what they're told. So we're at a juncture, I think, where we will soon have a lot of truth faced to us. And for most of us, we'll just say, well, thank God. I couldn't have gone on much longer. Finally, let's have the truth out there. But remember, for the vast majority of people, that's all going to be not just new for them, it's going to be absolutely shocking for them. And there are some very big shocks coming. And for us, we'll just say about time, finally, what happened, get on with it. But for the vast majority of people, and I mean vast majority of people, they are going to really struggle to understand it. And I think the White Hats probably have gauged it correctly through all of their psychological profiling, that the vast majority of people, this was the only route way to get them to where they want to be. So listen, it's just great to talk to you all. And I'm sorry we didn't have too many animals to come and say hello to you today. Do you want to come and say hello then? Come on then, just very quickly. seeing that you've come up to say hello. So there we are, getting bigger and bigger by the day. I'm ready to sit down. There we go. So he's got a ball in his mouth, which means I have to go out now and play ball with him in the park. So thanks ever so much for taking the trouble to listen. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.